She only asked to sit beside him for 1 minute. A young widow hurried toward the bench, clutching a worn cloth bag like it held the last pieces of her life. Her breath shook. Her eyes kept searching behind her. She chose the man who looked least likely to ask questions. Grant Hollis sat alone, broad-shouldered and quiet, with the tired stillness of someone who had already survived more than most people could imagine. Nearby, his German shepherd held a rubber ball in his mouth. Then Bishop dropped it. The dog turned his head slowly, staring past her toward the path behind. "Can I sit here?" she whispered. Grant shifted aside. She sat on the edge of the bench, trying to look calm, though her hands trembled inside her gloves. Then she leaned closer. "If they ask, please don't tell them I came to you first." A car door closed somewhere behind them. Her whole body went still. Bishop stepped forward before Grant said a word. 3 men were coming. The one in front wore the careful face of a grieving father. The 2 behind him moved like men who had already decided how this would end. The woman lowered her eyes. "Please," she breathed. "Don't let them take me back." Grant stood slowly, and Bishop placed himself between her and the men. "Before we begin, tell us what city you're watching from today. We'd love to know how far this story travels." By the time the harbor quieted down, Grant Hollis usually had enough noise left inside him to last the rest of the evening. The forklifts near the cold storage warehouses had stopped whining. The salt trucks rolled through town with less urgency, and the last men on the docks moved like shadows under yellow lamps. He would finish whatever job had paid for the day, wipe the grease or road salt from his hands, then drive toward the lake with Bishop in the passenger seat. The routine held him together. His rented house sat near an old freezer plant, a narrow place with a kitchen table, a worn couch, 2 pairs of boots by the door, and a large rug where Bishop slept after long walks. There were no framed memories on the walls, no medals displayed, no signs that the man who lived there had once crossed oceans with a rifle, a radio, and orders he rarely spoke about. Grant kept the house clean because disorder made his mind work too hard, and he kept it quiet because quiet asked fewer questions. Bishop asked plenty. The 7-year-old German shepherd woke before sunrise, placed his muzzle on the edge of Grant's bed when the alarm failed to do its job, and waited by the door every afternoon with a cracked rubber ball between his teeth. His coat had thickened for the Michigan winter, black and tan fur catching bits of snow until he looked dusted with ash and flour. Old training still lived in his bones, but age had softened the way he carried it. He moved with patience now, saving his strength for moments that deserved it. Grant trusted that more than any alarm. That evening, Lake Superior lay broken into gray plates of ice and dark seams of open water. The walking path near the Veterans Memorial had been scraped earlier in the day, though patches of black ice still waited in the low spots where meltwater had frozen again. Grant threw the ball toward a stand of bare trees, watched Bishop run after it, then sat on a weathered bench facing the lake. A woman came out of the parking lot fast enough to make the icy pavement complain beneath her shoes. She caught herself once against a metal trash can, glanced behind her, and kept moving. Her coat was gray and too thin at the cuffs, her dark hair wind-blown across one cheek, her face pale except for a red mark near the jaw that might have come from cold and might have come from something less forgiving. A cloth bag was pressed tight against her chest, held with both hands as if it contained the final pieces of a life she could still prove belonged to her. She chose the man who looked least likely to ask questions. Grant looked up as she stopped near the bench. She stood there for half a breath, trying to gather herself into something ordinary, but her lungs betrayed her. Every inhale came short, every exhale disappeared in a white thread. "Can I sit here for a minute?" she asked. Grant shifted to one side, leaving space between them. The woman sat at the edge of the bench, knees close together, shoulders drawn in, eyes fixed on the lake with the desperate discipline of someone trying to seem calm in public. Bishop came back with the ball, slowed when he saw her, and set it down near Grant's boot. The dog studied her hands first. Grant noticed the same thing: wet gloves, tight fingers, a tremor that kept returning no matter how hard she pressed the bag against herself. "What's your name?" he asked. She swallowed. "Nora. Nora Bellamy." Grant let the name settle. "You hurt anywhere, Nora?" Her eyes moved once toward the parking lot. "I don't think so." That answer carried too much uncertainty for a simple question. Bishop lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air near her boots, then stepped back and sat beside Grant's leg. He gave her room, but his body faced the path. Nora noticed. A small flicker of fear passed through her face, then faded when Bishop stayed still. "He won't bother you," Grant said. "He's yours." "Most days he lets me believe that." A tired sound escaped her, almost a laugh, too small to survive the wind. She looked down at the cloth bag and loosened her grip by a fraction. Inside, Grant saw the corner of a death certificate, a folded insurance form, several handwritten notes, and something made of pale blue yarn. "My husband died last winter," she said. "Colin Voss, construction accident outside Negaunee." Grant waited. "After the funeral, his father said he'd help me with the paperwork." Her voice stayed careful, each word chosen like she feared the wrong one might call someone closer. "Harlan said I wasn't thinking clearly. He took my old phone so I wouldn't read messages that upset me. Then my bank card stayed in his office. My car went to the company shop and never came back." A gull cried somewhere over the lake, sharp and lonely. Nora rubbed one thumb along the seam of the bag. "People stopped calling after a while. When I saw them at church or the grocery store, they looked at me like I might break in front of them. Harlan had already explained me before I ever entered the room." Grant's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed even. "Do you have someone safe to call?" She looked at the yarn again. It was the unfinished body of a small sweater, folded around itself, one sleeve missing. The sight of it made her face change in a way Grant understood without asking. "I thought I did," she said. The path behind them grew quieter. Grant had learned to distrust a sudden absence of sound. Bishop felt it too. The dog's ears lifted, his head turning away from Nora and toward the entrance to the park. Nora's hands locked around the bag. Grant saw her eyes close for the smallest moment, as if her body had heard something her mind had been praying to avoid. A car door had shut somewhere beyond the trees. Another followed, then a third. For the first time since she reached the bench, Nora seemed to run out of ways to keep herself still. Her shoulders rose, her breath caught, and the unfinished sweater disappeared deeper beneath the papers in her bag. "If they ask," she whispered, "please don't tell them I came to you first." Grant kept his gaze on the lake a moment longer. Men who wanted control often listened for panic, and he had no intention of giving them any. He set one hand on the bench, slow and open, then stood. Bishop stood with him. 3 men appeared at the far end of the path, walking through the thin crust of old snow. The man in front moved with a polished calm that belonged more to a funeral home than a public park. His dark wool coat buttoned neatly, his silver hair combed back from a face arranged into concern. The two behind him spread out a few steps apart, heavy boots pressing deep, their eyes moving over Grant, Nora, Bishop, and the empty space around the bench. Nora lowered her head. "That's him," she breathed. Bishop placed one paw forward, the rubber ball forgotten between his tracks in the snow. His body went still, his attention fixed on the men coming down the path. Grant looked once at Nora, then at the approaching figures. The evening had begun as routine. Now it had witnesses. Harlan Voss reached the cleared part of the path with the smooth patience of a man used to being welcomed before he explained himself. His dark wool coat sat neatly over his shoulders, his leather gloves looked untouched by salt or work, and his silver hair had been combed back with the care of someone who believed appearance could settle half a room before a word was spoken. Behind him, Ray Madsen and Tucker Bell followed a few steps apart, their boots carving heavy marks into the old snow. They came like they belonged there. Ray was built wide through the chest and neck, red-faced from the cold, with the slow confidence of a man who had spent years moving lumber, drywall, and smaller men out of his way. Tucker looked younger, sharper at the edges, his coat zipped too high, and his eyes shifting from Grant to Bishop to the empty stretch of path behind them. He kept one hand near his pocket, then seemed to remember the dog and let it hang at his side. Harlan stopped several yards from the bench. "Nora, sweetheart," he said, warm enough for anyone passing by to hear concern. "You scared everyone." Nora's shoulders drew inward at the word. It was a tiny motion, almost hidden by the gray coat, yet Grant saw it the way he saw thin ice glaze over a tire track. Bishop saw something too, his head lowered by an inch, his eyes moving from Harlan to Ray. Grant stayed beside the bench, one hand loose at his side. Harlan turned his attention to him, and the careful sadness on his face deepened. "I'm sorry you've been pulled into this. My daughter-in-law has been struggling since my son passed. Grief can twist the mind in strange ways, and she's had a hard year." Nora's fingers dug into the cloth bag. "Harlan," she whispered, He lifted a hand toward her, palm open, gentle for the audience of strangers that might have glanced over. "We're going home. We'll get you warm and we'll talk this through like family." The word family seemed to land on Nora's skin instead of in her ears. Grant looked at her. "You want to go with him?" Her answer came fast, barely above breath. "No." Harlan's expression held, though something behind the eyes went flat. "She says things when she's upset. Colin's accident left her unsteady. We've tried doctors, church counseling, everything we could manage." Nora turned her face toward Grant and the words came out in uneven pieces. "He has my papers, my phone, my bank card. My car's been at his company shop since October." She swallowed, eyes wet from wind and something older. "When I tried to leave during the storm, he locked the laundry room door from the outside." Ray shifted his weight. Tucker looked down. For a moment, the lake wind filled the gap where decent men might have spoken. Grant placed his phone on the bench, screen turned upward. The emergency call page glowed there, one touch away. Harlan noticed it, then noticed the city camera fixed high on the lamppost near the memorial sign. The careful father returned to his face. "Sir," Harlan said, "you seem like a reasonable man. I respect veterans, I truly do. But this is private, and you could make matters worse by pretending you understand a household you've never stepped inside." Bishop moved first. A single half-step placed him between Nora's knees and the line Ray had started taking toward the bench. The dog's body lowered, not crouching, not lunging, simply measuring the air in front of him with the stillness of old training. Ray stared at him and tried to laugh. That dog better not be one of those bite-first kinds. Grant glanced at Ray's boot, now sliding another inch toward Nora. "He usually lets people make their own mistakes." Tucker gave one sharp laugh, then swallowed the rest when Bishop turned his head. "Ray," he muttered, "maybe give the dog his personal space." Ray squared his shoulders, pride doing hard labor on a slippery path. "It's just a dog." Bishop snapped forward. His jaws closed in the air a few inches from Ray's knee with a clean, hard crack that cut through the wind. Ray jerked backward, one boot skidding on black ice, both arms swinging wide as if he had suddenly taken up figure skating under terrible instruction. Tucker grabbed the back of his coat and pulled him upright before he landed flat. "Ray," Tucker breathed, eyes still fixed on Bishop, "maybe don't negotiate with the wolf." A small sound escaped Nora. It trembled, almost broke, then became the faintest breath of relief. Bishop had already returned to his place. He stood in front of her, calm again, ears forward, tail still, a living boundary drawn across the path. Harlan's mouth tightened. The warmth in his voice slipped for a second, showing the colder machinery underneath. "This is foolish," he said. Grant met his eyes. She said no. The words sat there plainly, without volume, without decoration. They did more damage than anger would have. A woman walking a small terrier slowed near the memorial, saw Bishop standing like a carved shadow in the snow, then crossed to the other side of the path with the speed of someone eager to survive her own curiosity. Harlan looked from Grant to Nora. "You'll regret embarrassing yourself like this." Nora's hands shook around the bag, but she lifted her chin enough to look at him. "I already regret going back the last time." Ray had found his balance by then, though one hand still hovered near his knee as if checking whether Bishop had taken a piece of him by reputation alone. Tucker tugged his sleeve again, softer this time. "Mr. Voss," Tucker said under his breath. "Camera." Harlan's gaze flicked to the lamppost. His face changed by almost nothing, yet the decision passed through him. He stepped back, smoothing one gloved hand down the front of his coat. "This continues," he said to Nora. "You know that." Grant reached for his phone and held it at his side, ready. Harlan turned first. Ray followed, watching the ice under his boots with new respect. Tucker walked last, throwing one quick glance at Bishop, the kind a man gives a stove after learning it is hot. Their footsteps faded beyond the trees. Bishop stayed where he was until the last dark shape disappeared from the path. Then he turned, picked up the rubber ball from the snow, and placed it at Nora's feet, as though returning something the evening had dropped. Nora stared at it for a long moment. Grant looked toward the parking lot, then back at her. "There's a place behind the old library. Safe phone, heat. Someone who knows what to do with this." She wiped at her cheek with the back of one glove. "Is it far?" "Close enough to reach before dark," Grant said. Bishop nudged the ball closer to her boot. This time, Nora picked it up. Grant drove through the smaller streets of Marquette, with both hands low on the wheel. tires grinding over snow, salt, and the gray slush gathered near the curbs. Streetlights had already come on, glowing pale against the heavy sky, and the storefront windows along Washington Street reflected the truck in brief, broken flashes. Nora sat in the back seat with the cloth bag on her lap, holding it close enough that the papers inside bent against her coat. Bishop lay between her and the door. Every few blocks, the German shepherd lifted his eyes when another car passed too close, then settled again with his chin near Nora's boot. The old dog gave no comfort in the soft, foolish way strangers sometimes offered it. He simply stayed where the danger would have to pass through him first. Nora noticed that. Grant pulled up behind the old library on 3rd Street, where the public entrance had gone dark for the evening. Around back, a narrow door sat beneath a small metal sign that read Harbor House Outreach, the letters chipped at the corners from years of lake wind. A single bulb burned above the frame, yellow and tired, bright enough to make the ice on the steps visible. Inside, warmth moved slowly. The room smelled of weak coffee, old carpet, and radiator heat. A row of padded chairs lined one wall, each one worn differently by people who had waited in them for court forms, bus vouchers, safe rides, bad news, or a few minutes without someone standing over them. On a side table, a basket held travel-sized toothpaste, socks, granola bars, and small bottles of shampoo with labels from local motels. Nora stood near the door until Grant stepped aside. "Take any chair," he said. She chose the one with its back to the wall. Miriam Klein arrived 23 minutes later with snow on her shoulders and a blue folder under one arm. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with short brown hair streaked lightly at the temples and the steady face of someone who had learned to move calmly inside other people's emergencies. She greeted Grant by name, glanced once at Bishop, then set a cup of water on the table near Nora. "I'm Miriam," she said. "You can start wherever your mind lets you." Nora looked at the cup for a while before touching it. Her gloves left wet marks on the paper sleeve. The story came out in pieces, never in the order it had happened. Colin's funeral came first, then the insurance forms, then Harlan sitting at the kitchen table with a pen, telling her signatures was easier when one person handled everything. After that came the phone, the bank card, the car at the company shop, the church women who stopped visiting, the neighbors who waved with pity from a distance. Miriam wrote dates in the margin of her pad. "When did he take the phone?" "March," Nora said. "The week after the funeral." "Who had access to the bank account?" "Harlan. He said the card was safer in his office." "Did he ever stop you from leaving the house?" Nora pressed one hand around the cup until the rim bent slightly. The laundry room was off the back hall. "He turned the lock from outside. Said I needed to calm down before I embarrassed Colin's name." Grant sat in the outer room, close enough to hear tone, far enough to leave the questions in Miriam's hands. He wiped melted snow from the edge of one boot with a paper towel, then folded it neatly and dropped it into the trash. Bishop stayed near the door, his ears relaxed only when Miriam slid the extra bolt into place and lowered the blinds over the rear window. Miriam asked about medication, mail, keys, insurance, vehicles, doctors, and anyone Nora might trust with her location. Each answer made a line on the page. Each line made the room feel less like panic and more like a map. Then Miriam asked about cameras. Nora's face changed. For several seconds, she looked toward the floor heater, where dust trembled in the warm air. "He drank sometimes after dinner," she said. "Not sloppy, just enough to get proud of himself." Miriam waited. One night, he pointed at the ceiling in the kitchen and said people behaved better when they remembered a house could remember things. Nora's voice thinned. "He said everything saved to a box in the linen closet by the stairs." He laughed after that. "Told me Voss Holmes stayed orderly because someone had to care about standards." Grant looked toward the dark window in the outer room. A man who recorded a house rarely recorded only anger. Men like that saved proof when it helped them, and sometimes proof kept more than they intended. Miriam capped her pen and opened the blue folder. Inside were forms, phone numbers, a prepaid cell, and a sheet titled Safety Plan in plain black letters. She placed the phone on the table first. "This stays with you tonight," she said. "Only 3 numbers go in it for now. Mine, emergency services, and one safe contact if we can find one." Nora looked at the phone as though it might disappear. They built the plan slowly. A room for the night at Harbor House, a list of documents Nora needed to replace or recover, a note to avoid calling anyone Harlan might pressure, a written account of what had happened, with dates where her memory could hold them. A way to request a civil standby if she needed to return for medicine, clothes, identification, and property that belonged to her. The word civil made Nora blink. It sounded too neat for a life that had become so tangled. Miriam explained it in ordinary language. A deputy could be present while Nora collected essentials from the residents, keeping the peace and documenting what was taken. Grant listened from the doorway, arms folded, his attention fixed more on Nora's breathing than the legal terms. Outside, a truck passed in the alley. Bishop rose before the headlights slid across the blinds. His body went still, head angled toward the rear door. The sound faded, and after a few seconds he lay down again, closer to Nora's chair than before. That small movement changed the room. Nora's shoulders lowered. She took her first full drink of water. Later, Miriam led her to a narrow restroom behind the office, where a faded print of a summer lake hung crooked above a twin bed. The blanket was brown wool, scratchy but clean. Nora set the cloth bag on the floor, pulled out the half-finished blue sweater, and held it against her chest as if it weighed more than paper, yarn, or memory should. Grant remained by the coffee machine in the front room. The pot had burned down to something bitter and black, though he poured a little anyway. Miriam joined him with the blue folder tucked under her elbow, her face tired in a way that made her look both older and stronger. Near midnight, Nora came back into the doorway. Her hair had been brushed back with her fingers, and the sweater was folded over one arm. "The door code," she said. "At Harlan's house. He never changed it." Miriam reached for her pad. Nora gave the 4 numbers, then added the location of the linen closet, the drawer where her medication might be, and the mudroom hook where Colin's old coat still hung. Miriam made a call to a county deputy she trusted, keeping her voice low and exact. By the time she hung up, morning had gained a shape. Civil standby, 8:30, essential property only. Grant looked through the glass of the back door, where snow clung to the outside and melted into slow lines under the weak bulb. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Miriam tore a page from her pad and handed it over. The list was short. Drive witness, keep Bishop controlled, let Nora lead. Grant read it once. That was harder than it looked. Morning came to Marquette in a pale silver wash, thin enough to make every house on Presque Isle Avenue look borrowed from an old photograph. A county patrol car sat in front of the Voss home, with its engine running, quiet and plain, its presence marking the line between family business and something that finally had witnesses. Grant parked behind it, then opened the rear door for Bishop. Nora stepped out last. She held the cloth bag against her ribs, though most of what mattered now waited inside the house. Miriam Klein stood beside the deputy on the porch, blue folder tucked under one arm, her breath turning white as she reviewed the plan one final time. Essential items, personal documents, medication, anything clearly belonging to Nora. The deputy, a square-faced man named Paul Reardon, nodded toward the keypad. "You enter first, Mom. We'll stay with you." Nora lifted her hand. The 4 numbers looked smaller than they had in her memory. Her fingers shook once before she pressed them in. The lock clicked, the door opened, and the smell of polished wood, old coffee, and lemon cleaner moved out into the cold. The house was warm. That made it worse somehow. Everything inside sat in its assigned place. Shoes lined under the mudroom bench. Coats hung by weight and color. Mail stacked in a tray beside the kitchen door. A clean home could hide many things, Grant thought, especially when cleanliness had been turned into a kind of command. Nora stopped in the mudroom. Colin's work coat still hung on the second hook, faded brown canvas with dry plaster dust along one sleeve. She reached toward it, then paused, her hand hovering before she touched the pocket. Inside were a dull carpenter's pencil and a folded scrap of paper with window measurements written in blocky numbers. Her mouth tightened around a breath. Miriam photographed the coat, then the kitchen drawers, then the metal box under the sink where Nora's bank card lay beside a stack of company receipts. In a locked cabinet near the back hallway, Deputy Reardon found Nora's old phone, a prescription bottle with her name on it, and a small envelope of insurance papers clipped together in Harlan's handwriting. "Documenting item recovery," Reardon said into his body camera. His voice sounded too ordinary for the room. Nora had come back for medicine paperwork and one last piece of her own life. What waited under the stairs belonged to a life she had never been allowed to know. The linen closet stood beside the stairwell, exactly where Nora had described it. White towels filled the upper shelves, folded so flat they looked pressed. Behind them, Grant found a camera hub, 3 storage drives marked by month, and a yellow legal pad filled with Harlan's tight, angled handwriting. Miriam read the first page in silence. Calls at 8:12 p.m., left house 3:44 p.m., crying in kitchen again, confused after church. Watch closely. Nora stared at the words as if they had been written on her skin. He wrote it down? Miriam closed the legal pad with care. Yes, Bishop shifted near the stairwell. The dog had been calm through the rooms, his leash loose in Grant's hand, his nose working quietly over thresholds and corners. Now he stood before a short door beneath the stairs, body squared, muzzle pointed toward the lower seam. He did not paw at it. He simply waited. Grant looked at Reardon, who gave a small nod. The door opened with a dry scrape. Cold storage air drifted out, carrying dust, old paper, plastic bins, and the faint smell of Christmas decorations kept too many seasons in the dark. Grant crouched and moved a paint can, a coil of orange extension cord, and a torn bag of artificial garland. Behind them sat a clear plastic box with a blue lid, its top covered in gray dust except for 2 smudged places where hands had lifted it before. He pulled it into the hall. Nora's name was on the first envelope, not typed by a company, written by hand. Miriam knelt beside the box, then looked at Nora before opening anything. Nora nodded once, though her face had gone still. The envelopes were bundled with rubber bands. Some carried official stamps from Wisconsin. Others had return addresses crossed out and rewritten. Several had been opened cleanly with a letter knife, then tucked back inside as if the act itself had been tidy enough to forgive. Miriam read the first line of the top letter. "My name is Evelyn Bellamy, and I believe Nora may be my daughter." Nora made no sound. The next letter was longer, written in blue ink that faded near the folds. Evelyn wrote about hospital records, an adoption file that had gone missing between agencies, a winter morning in Green Bay, a baby with dark hair, and the scar on the left wrist from a broken drinking glass. The letters continued through years, different postmarks, different handwriting pressure, the same ache finding new paper. "I am still looking. If this reaches you, please know I never stopped. I will wait for whatever answer you are ready to give." Nora sat down on the stair, the plastic box between her knees. One opened envelope slipped from her fingers and landed face up on the runner carpet. Bishop lowered himself beside the stairs and placed his chin on his paws, close enough for her to see him without reaching. At the bottom of the box lay a different envelope. Miriam lifted it carefully. This one had been mailed to Evelyn Bellamy in Green Bay. The return name said Nora Voss. Nora's eyes narrowed. "I never sent that." Reardon stepped closer. Miriam unfolded the letter and read only enough for the room to understand. It said Nora had a new family, a new life, and no wish to reopen the past. It asked Evelyn to stop contacting her. It ended with a signature that tried to look like Nora's and failed in all the places fear never would. Miriam placed it beside an insurance form Nora had signed months earlier. The difference showed in the slant, the spacing, the shape of the B in Bellamy. Reardon photographed both documents. No one needed to raise a voice. Nora touched the forged letter with 2 fingers, then pulled them back as if the page were hot. Years of silence gathered around her, changing shape one envelope at a time. She had believed absence had chosen her. Now absence had a hand, a pen, a drawer under the stairs. A vehicle rolled into the driveway. Bishop's head came up. Through the front window, Harlan Voss stepped out of his car and stopped beside the patrol vehicle. He saw the deputy first, then Miriam, then Grant in the hallway, then Nora sitting on the stairs with the open box of letters in front of her. His gloved hand closed around the porch rail. For the first time since Grant had seen him, Harlan's face lost its practiced sorrow. He looked at the house as though the walls had spoken out of turn. Then his hand moved to the door handle. The front door opened before anyone on the stairs moved. Harlan Voss stepped into the foyer with snow melting on the toes of his polished shoes, his gloved hand still resting on the brass knob. His eyes moved over Deputy Reardon first, then Miriam, then Grant and Bishop in the hallway. When he finally looked at Nora, the open box of letters sat between her knees like something pulled from the ground after years of burial. "Nora," he said, softer than the room deserved. "You need to be careful with those." She held one envelope against her palm. The paper had been opened long before her hands ever touched it. Harlan took a slow breath, arranging his face into grief. "Evelyn Bellamy abandoned you once. Those letters would have broken your heart all over again. Colin knew how fragile this made you. We all did. Nora looked at the forged letter on the stair beside Miriam's folder. Her voice came out low, steady enough to surprise even her. Why was it opened? Harlan blinked. She lifted another envelope. Why was this opened? Nora, why was my phone locked in your cabinet? Why was my bank card in a metal box under your sink? Why did you write to my mother with my name at the bottom? The last question changed the air. Ray Madsen and Tucker Bell had seemed loud at the park because they used size and movement. Harlan had built his life on something quieter. A pause here. A lowered voice there. A story told early enough that everyone else entered it late. Now the room had paper. Deputy Reardon stepped closer, body camera facing the stairwell. Miriam gathered the forged letter, the legal pad, the envelopes, and the insurance forms into separate evidence sleeves from her bag. She labeled each one by location, time, and who had handled it. Harlan's jaw worked once. This is theft. Reardon answered calmly. This is a civil standby. These items are being documented. Anything beyond that goes to the investigator. Grant stood near the wall with Bishop's leash wrapped once around his wrist. Bishop stayed low beside him, eyes on Harlan, ears forward. The dog had grown still in the way old working dogs did when a person's body spoke louder than his mouth. Nora stood with the box in her arms. For a moment, the house seemed to hold its breath around her. The coat in the mudroom, the folded towels, the lemon-clean floor, the legal pad filled with her private hours. All of it belonged to a version of her life that had been arranged by someone else's hands. She walked out carrying Colin's coat, her medication, her old phone, and the letters. Harlan called after her once. Nora, you are making a mistake. She paused at the porch, one hand around the box, the other around the sleeve of Colin's coat. Snowmelt dripped from the roof in slow ticks beside her. I already made that mistake, she said. I kept coming back. Then she stepped past him. The next 3 days moved through Harbor House in phone calls, copied forms, and cups of coffee gone cold beside Miriam's blue folder. Nora slept in short stretches, waking whenever tires hissed on wet pavement outside the library. Each time, Bishop lifted his head from the hallway rug, and each time the room returned to itself. Miriam started with the letters. She called the Wisconsin Adoption Records Office, listed in the oldest envelope, then a hospital archive near Green Bay, then a retired caseworker whose handwriting appeared on a photocopied form from years earlier. Names shifted, addresses changed, files had been boxed, moved, scanned, mislabeled, and reopened. By the second afternoon, a thread began to hold. Evelyn Bellamy was alive. By the third day, Miriam found a current number tied to a small alterations shop in Green Bay. The call was placed from the back office at Harbor House, with Nora sitting beside the desk, fingers pressed flat against the wood. A sewing machine hummed in the background when the woman answered. Miriam gave her name first, then Harbor House, then asked for Evelyn Bellamy. The sound on the other end changed, fabric sliding, a chair scraping. This is Evelyn. Miriam spoke carefully. She mentioned old letters, adoption records, a woman named Nora Bellamy, and the scar on a child's left wrist from a broken drinking glass. The line went silent for so long Nora's face lost color. Then Evelyn breathed out a sound too small to be called a word. Does she still have it? Evelyn asked. The scar? Nora lifted her hand to her left wrist where the pale mark curved near the bone. Miriam looked at her. Yes, she said. Rain came on the day Evelyn arrived, cold and thin, turning the last ridge of old snow along the sidewalk into gray water. The front glass of Harbor House fogged at the edges. Someone had turned the heat too high, and the coffee on the warming plate smelled burned by noon. Nora stood near the row of chairs with both hands around the box of letters. Grant waited in the hall with Bishop. Miriam stayed close enough to help, far enough to let the moment find its own shape. The door opened at 2:17. Evelyn Bellamy stepped inside wearing a navy coat, rain on her gray-brown hair, and a blue canvas bag looped over one arm. She carried a round tin under her other hand, the kind people kept buttons in, or photographs, or things too small and sacred for a drawer. She saw Nora and stopped. Age had changed her face, yet something in the eyes reached across the room before either woman moved. Nora's fingers tightened around the box. Evelyn raised one hand to her mouth, then lowered it as if afraid any sudden motion might break the air. Nori, she said. The name struck Nora with a force she had no defense against. She remembered soap before she remembered a face. A low song, white light above a clinic bed, a woman crying harder than the child with the cut wrist. Evelyn opened the tin with shaking hands. Inside were a hospital bracelet, 2 baby photographs, a small pink mitten, and copies of letters folded so many times the creases had gone soft. She took out one photograph and turned it toward Nora. "You had this little crease here when you smiled," Evelyn whispered, touching the corner of her own mouth. "And the scar came from a glass that broke in the sink. You were too. I wrapped your wrist in a dish towel and sang all the way to urgent care." Nora looked down at her wrist. The box of letters slipped against her coat, and Evelyn reached for it at the same time she did. Their hands met on the cardboard edge. That was when Nora stepped forward. The embrace came awkwardly, with the box between them at first, then the tin, then neither. Evelyn held her as if counting the bones of a child she had lost and found grown. Nora's face pressed into the wet shoulder of her mother's coat, and the sound she made had waited years for a safe room. Grant looked away. Bishop lay down across the hallway outside the office door, chin on his paws. The crying inside shifted slowly into broken questions, then answers, then the fragile rhythm of 2 women trying to cross a bridge built from paper. That evening, Nora and Evelyn sat at the small table under the crooked Summer Lake painting. They opened the letters in order by date. Some were only a few lines, some ran for pages. One had a faint water stain that blurred the ink near the words "I am still here." Nora read each one slowly. Now the years came back in her mother's handwriting. The letters did not make time move faster. March came to Marquette, with gray rain, thawed gutters, and snowbanks shrinking into dirty walls along the edges of parking lots. Nora spent most mornings at Harbor House with Miriam, sorting copies of documents into folders marked by date. Some days ended with answers. Others ended with a stack of papers, a headache behind her eyes, and Bishop's steady breathing from the hallway rug. The investigation widened one signature at a time. Harlan's records led from the Voss house to the company office, then through repair invoices, insurance transfers, and accounts Nora had never seen. Money paid after Colin's death had moved through side accounts tied to Voss Construction. Several home repair bills carried Nora's name, though the handwriting belonged elsewhere. The letter sent to Evelyn was examined, compared, and entered into evidence with the rest of the paper trail. By April, the lake began to break open. The courthouse parking lot still held a few ridges of old snow under the parked cars on the morning Nora testified. Evelyn had taken in the shoulders of a navy coat so it fit Nora cleanly, and Miriam tied the folder of letters with a length of cotton string after the metal clasp snapped in the lobby. Grant waited near the security desk with Bishop, who had been permitted to remain outside the courtroom after Miriam explained that Nora steadied her breathing when she knew he was close. Nora walked in carrying her own name in a stack of paper. She spoke by dates because dates had survived what memory sometimes blurred. March 7th, the phone disappeared. March 11th, the bank card moved to Harlan's office. October 2nd, the car went to the company shop. January 19th, the laundry room lock turned from the outside while storm warnings rolled across the radio. Her voice slowed when Colin's name entered the record. It slowed again when the letters were shown. The prosecutor asked about the first time Nora saw Evelyn's handwriting. Nora looked at the envelope in the evidence sleeve, at the opened edge, at the faint blue ink inside. "I thought my mother had chosen a life without me," she said. "Someone chose that for both of us." Across the room, Harlan sat straight in a dark suit, his hands folded, his face composed for anyone who might still mistake composure for truth. When the forged letter appeared on the screen, his jaw tightened, then loosened. The room stayed quiet enough for the ceiling lights to hum. The verdict came late in the day. Financial exploitation, forgery, unlawful restraint, interference with personal property and communications. The legal words sounded clean, almost too clean. Yet they named things Nora had lived through in rooms where no one else had been listening. When the judge read the sentence, Nora looked down at her hands. Evelyn sat on one side of her, Miriam sat on the other. Grant stood in the hall with Bishop, and when the door finally opened, the dog rose before anyone spoke. Nora knelt in front of him and pressed her forehead briefly against his. Spring moved in by inches after that. She stayed for a while above Evelyn's alteration shop in Green Bay, in a small apartment with narrow stairs, a window over the alley, and the smell of bread drifting from the bakery next door before sunrise. Evelyn worked below during the day, the sewing machine tapping through the floorboards, while Nora sorted through letters at the kitchen table. They learned each other in small domestic ways. Evelyn drank tea too strong. Nora cut toast into squares without noticing. Both of them left lights on in hallways. Some evenings were easy. Some ended with Nora standing at the sink, listening to the water run over her hands, while Evelyn folded dish towels behind her. The lost years sat with them, yet the room kept making space. Grant returned to Marquette, to the harbor, to the walking path by the lake. His house near the old freezer plant gained a few changes almost by accident. A curtain Evelyn had sewn for the kitchen window, a bag of coffee Nora said tasted less like burned rope. A note from Miriam taped near the door with a phone number and the words "Bring tools Saturday." The room behind the library needed hinges first, then shelves, then a better lock, brighter bulbs, a rubber mat for the icy step, a small table near the outlet, and a cabinet with a key Miriam wore around her wrist. Evelyn mailed pale blue curtains. Nora brought labels, folders, a box of clean gloves, and a stack of printed pages that explained how to make copies of identification, how to prepare an emergency bag, how to request a civil standby, and how to tell one safe person enough to be found. They called it the Thaw Room. The name came from Nora, written in pencil at the top of Miriam's planning sheet. It fit the space better than any official title. People could come there for a phone, a photocopy, a locked drawer, a cup of coffee, a quiet chair, or the first sentence of a story they had carried alone too long. Grant fixed the outside light on a Saturday afternoon, while Bishop slept near the window in a square of pale sun. The dog chose that corner himself and claimed it with the certainty of an old soldier picking good ground. By the time the room opened, a folded blanket sat there, along with a water bowl and the rubber ball Nora had kept from the bench. The first visitor arrived before the coffee finished brewing. She was middle-aged, wearing a brown coat and carrying a purse held tight against her ribs. Her eyes moved over the phone, the copy machine, the chairs, the locked cabinet, then landed on Bishop. She stood there long enough for the room to understand her silence. Bishop lifted his head, breathed once, and settled again. The woman sat down. Nora stood behind the small counter with a stack of intake cards, watching snow from a late squall land on the front step and vanish almost as soon as it touched the concrete. Grant came in from the hall, wiping his hands on a rag after tightening the last loose screw on the doorframe. "You all right?" he asked. Nora looked past him through the front glass toward the far line of Lake Superior where dark water showed between broken pieces of ice. For a long moment she listened to the coffee maker, the copier warming up, Evelyn's curtains moving slightly in the draft, and the quiet breathing of a woman beginning to make a call. "Today," Nora said, "I know where I am." Outside, the lake held its cold. Still, winter had started letting go. A bench by a frozen lake, a rubber ball dropped in the snow, a box of letters hidden where no one was supposed to look. Those are the pieces of this story that stay with me because they feel like the way life really changes. Quietly, through things we almost miss. Nora, Grant, Bishop, and Evelyn come from fiction, but the ache underneath them belongs to real people. There are folks who know what it feels like to be spoken for, doubted, watched, or made small inside a place everyone else calls home. There are also people still keeping old photographs, old prayers, and old hopes in a drawer, waiting for a day they cannot name. What I carry from this one is simple. Sometimes God's kindness arrives through a locked door finally opening, a dog lying near the window, or one person saying, "I believe you," when the world has grown too tired to listen. May God bless anyone listening who is healing from something they rarely talk about. Share your memories, prayers, or thoughts below if this story touched something in you. And if grounded human stories like this matter to you, liking and subscribing helps keep them going. Some letters take years to arrive. Still, love keeps writing.